What's up, Rovers? We've got another Montelli associate with us today, and well, they just can't stop winning, can they? Ciaccona has arrived for the back half of patch 2.3. If you're wondering why this video is so late, there's been a lot of extra testing about Ciaccona and unusual teams and also how she fares as a main DPS. You'll be surprised at how strong she actually is alone. In other words, literally every single situation where you might use Ciaccona is covered today. But I've also just been busy covering other new game releases. Shall we see what Ciaccona can do? Today's guide has taken over 50 hours to make. If you found this video helpful, feel free to leave a like or subscribe. As a reminder, full team breakdowns have been moved to a separate video follow-up. This guide will still mention her best teammates and how the teams play, but nuances on gearing and rotations will be saved for the next video. If you want an early peek, Ciaccona's spreadsheet is fully complete with team rotations in the description and pinned. We'll cover Ciaccona's team role and main mechanics first, then the typical deeper dive. Forte priorities come after, and then echo stuff. Main stats, substats, and I know some of you will be wondering how Gust of Welkin compares to Moonlit clouds. Don't worry, we'll get there. Then we have weapon comparisons, endgame stat goals, and her sequences breakdown. We'll end with her rotations and a short summary of her team setups. Let's dive right in. Now, Ciaccona is supposed to be a sub-DPS, however, she doesn't follow the rules of a typical sub-DPS, except this time, I don't think it was intended. Because of how late this video is, you've probably seen my preceding jump cancel tech video and other guides on how to play Ciaccona faster. Now, the old dash cancel we will discuss later was easy to perform on media server, but is near impossible to perform on live server, most likely because Kuro didn't like how strong it made her. Unfortunately for them, the jump cancel still exists and makes Ciaccona perform far better than expected both as a main DPS and sub DPS. Please keep in mind that this jump cancel tech is crucial to Ciaccona's placement in the meta, and not only noticeably improves her sub DPS capability, but massively warps her main DPS potential to the point that she rivals Carlotta in raw damage. This is an extremely important topic I'll elaborate on later. If I ignore the jump cancel and look at the rest of her kit, it is clear that Ciaccona's mechanics are incredibly simple. Her kit descriptions are relatively short, and she only has one type of Forte bar, which is uncommon for a second generation unit. Your only goal is to fill her Forte bar while spawning ensemble sylphs along the way. Sylphs spawn whenever you perform basic 4 or skill cast to auto finish your attacks even if you got interrupted. But only sylphs spawned by basic 4 will enter solo concert to buff the team's arrow damage. With a full Forte bar, your heavy attack has a mini nuke with the 3 seconds of grouping. That's it. Forte can be gained from intro and basic 4. Liberation locks you into recital mode, which pulses out your choice of Spectro Frazzle or Aero Erosion in a massive AoE every 1.5 seconds. If you exit this mode manually, she stops pulsing. If you swap back to her after Liberation is active, she stops pulsing. Therefore, we cast her Liberation last and leave her alone. So how does Ciaccona work? The intended reason to bring her is Aero damage and Aero Erosion team buffs and applying your choice of Frazzle or Aero Erosion passively. Therefore, you normally want to pair her on Aero DPS or Frazzle DPS teams to quickly set up her buffs and outro. Except she also deals a ton of damage, like a ton. She deals so much damage that she rivals Brent without Sig, and surpasses him if you give them Sigs, yet her rotation is still faster. And if you play her as a main DPS, her raw damage matches Carlotta, so you can choose to either focus on minimizing her field time to near Sanhua speed and get her buffs up ASAP, or give her extra field time and spam grouping plus DPS. Regardless of choice, I want to make it clear that while Ciaccona seems niche, she absolutely isn't. But this doesn't mean she's easy to play. It comes at a cost of a somewhat more difficult speedy rotation. Now, part of the reason why Ciaccona is so powerful is because of the Aero Erosion dot mechanic. Ciaccona can easily apply this in a massive AoE with her Forte or Liberation, but she also has grouping from her Forte. This means she effectively guarantees everything will be tagged with Aero Erosion. Furthermore, Aero Erosion scales far more steeply than Spectro Frazzle, dealing more damage per tick every 3 seconds despite only 3 stacks max than a 10 stack Frazzle, and lasts 15 seconds instead of 3 seconds per stack like Frazzle. Yes, I know Frazzle drops only 1 stack at a time, whereas Aero Erosion loses all stacks instantly, but let's be real, half of Ciaccona's kit applies Aero Erosion and her Liberation pulses out every 1.5 seconds seconds with ridiculous range. It's impossible to go 15 seconds without applying Aero Erosion with her on the team. Thus, you permanently sit at max stacks and deal permanently max damage, dealing 60 to 70k from just Aero Erosion every 27 seconds passively, regardless of what your team is doing. She deals more damage with static miss than every other 5-star sub-DPS in the game, except Changli. Yes, she's the second strongest sub-DPS, if you can even consider Changli a sub-DPS. And on top of this, she has the fastest non-swap rotation of any 5-star sub-DPS in the game at under 5 seconds. She benefits significantly from double intros, cutting rotations down to barely over 3 seconds, and she also has access to the Fleurdelys echo, which time stops the entire AoE it hits over its 2 seconds duration, which can be used to protect the most vulnerable part of Ciaccona's rotations. Unfortunately, she does not have Aero Shred to make up for Aero Rover being the only Rover lacking Elemental Shred, but her signature has it. Let's look at Forte Priorities next. If you use her as a sub-DPS, Liberation is ahead of everything else by a fair bit and is your main priority. Normal attacks in Forte Circuit then hold equal value as your source of heavy attacks. Skill and intro basically never matter and can be left at level 6. If you're playing her as a main DPS instead, priorities will shift and your normal attack tree far surpasses everything, nearing 35% weight. Your Forte Circuit is now casted 3 times instead of once, making it more valuable than your Liberation as well. Skill and intro are still useless. Still lost on how her Forte Circuit works? No worries, let's dig deeper. Ciaccona's Forte bar can hold up to 3 musical essence. When it's full, it replaces her normal heavy attack with heavy quadruple downbeat. Casting this burns all Forte to restore 25 Concerto immediately, and shoots an aerial projectile with a 0.5 seconds delay that triggers a massive 3 seconds vacuum with fairly high damage. This move is not animation locked and can be cancelled by literally anything, being Liberation cast, dodge cancels, and even jump cancels. It has low hyper armor and can be interrupted by most attacks. If you wait out the full animation until she reaches the ground, it is much slower. As a sub-DPS, we normally Liberation cancel once the shot comes out to avoid the hyper armor issue, and fill the rest of her Concerto to outro. But as a main DPS, we normally jump cancel after the shot to immediately get back into the aerial slam combo. The aerial suck also does AoE damage, leading to extremely consistent parries to protect Ciaccona if you continue her main DPS rotation. Ciaccona's Liberation does 2 things when entering Recital mode, which also despawns currently active Ensemble Sylphs. Big AoE damage, which you will almost never see the number of, and pulse out either Spectro Frazzle or Aero Erosion, depending on your choice, every 1.5 seconds for the next 30 seconds, 20 pulses total. It is not considered coordinated attacks. If you don't pick a dot type, she will default to Aero Erosion. Entering Recital mode respawns her 2 Ensemble Sylphs with her, which will still grant the Solo Concert buffs, so long as her Liberation continues. Normally, Solo Concert is only granted after Basic 4. These grant a plus 24% aero damage bonus to the team. Swapping back to her removes her Recital state, preventing her from applying more dots and removing her Ensemble Sylphs from the field. You can also manually exit Recital by pressing Liberation on her again if you didn't swap off. Therefore, we will always use Liberation to end her rotation. In Frazzle teams, Ciaccona's kit isn't useful besides applying Frazzle, so you can ignore her entire kit and just cast Liberation first rotation to make up for lack of intros. In Aero teams, it is preferred to run her entire rotation before casting Liberation to get the full benefits of her kit. Ciaccona's Resident skill does low damage and only has use as a Concerto tool and animation cancel tool. It provides an important 15 Concerto and is typically used to cancel Basic 4 when it begins to substitute using a jump or dash cancel. You can pre-hold heavy during this skill to cast her Forte heavy quadruple downbeat when her Forte bar is full. Otherwise, I wouldn't bother leveling this beyond 6 as it has a massive 10 seconds cooldown and only 161% motion value, even at level 10. This move will also spawn an Ensemble Sylph on cast, but it will not enter Solo Concert to provide Team Aero buffs, unless skill was used to cancel Basic 4, which conveniently fits how we would use her skill today. Ciaccona's normal attack tree is her second high source of damage as a sub-DPS, and her high source of damage as a main DPS. It is also the source of her Ensemble Sylphs and Solo Concert buff mechanic. Besides intro, the only other way to build Forte on Ciaccona is to cast Basic 4. Therefore, our goal is to reach Basic 4 as fast as possible. Intro skips us to Basic 3, but most of the time we won't intro Ciaccona twice. Basic 4 also spawns Ensemble Sylphs to grant the Solo Concert buff, plus 24% aero damage bonus for the team. Her standard heavy attack is useless and we never use it. Now, because Basic 4 spawns sylphs at the very start of the cast, we can immediately animation cancel to start her basic chain again. Because sylphs continue the attack that spawned them, we will still get the full damage, full concerto, and full energy from her Basic 4 too. Ciaccona's Basic 4 also hits harder than most characters, and is the slowest move on her kit, which is why animation cancels are so powerful on Ciaccona. The fastest consistent cancel for Ciaccona is a jump cancel, since landing instantly skips us to Basic 4, which we can jump cancel again. This can be done as early as when Ciaccona disappears when sliding back to the middle after Basic 3 completes, but before she reappears. It can also be performed right as her back knee unbends after landing from an aerial slam when skipping into Basic 4. Alternatively, dodge cancel resets you back to Basic 1, which is slightly slower than the jump cancel. If you're trying to replicate the media server dash cancel rotation on live server, it will only reset you to Basic 3 if you do a frame perfect dash with when Basic 4 starts, so good luck with doing that. That's why we go with the jump cancel. When introing to skip to Basic 3, this is Ciaccona's most vulnerable state, as Basic 3 is slow and has 0 hyper armor. It is recommended to cast Fleurdelys Echo as her intro ends to time stop enemies, and protect her Basic 3 combo to guarantee you get your second Forte stack. Ciaccona's jump cancel has a decent ground AoE when slamming, but is still somewhat prone to interruption. If you're playing her as a main DPS, her Forte Heavy can be used to protect it somewhat due to its sustained AoE hitbox for parries, high damage, high poise damage, and high shield damage. This allows you to comfortably fit 2 more jump cancels in to refill most of her Forte before the Forte Heavy ends. Because the jump cancel is faster than ground cancel, it is recommended for main DPS Ciaccona for better consistency to use jump cancel, since more of it is protected by the Forte Heavy even if it is mechanically harder to perform. Finally, dodge counters on Ciaccona will continue from Basic 3. However, this is a modified Basic 3 with a faster animation but still the same cast time, thus longer end lag. It will make it seem like Basic 4 starts later than expected. If you're going to jump cancel after a dodge counter, do not do it until Ciaccona reappears during Basic 4 and is about to jump into the air. Now, the sole purpose of Ciaccona's intro is to provide one Forte segment and skip to Basic 3. Note that the intro itself cannot spawn an ensemble sylph. It is recommended to cast Fleurdelys once the intro completes to safely perform Basic 3-4 and get your second Forte segment, as her Basic 3 is very vulnerable to interruption. A double intro Ciaccona rotation is extremely useful since it guarantees you can get 3 Forte stacks safely, and is actually just straight up faster than the single intro rotation with jump cancels. In fact, a double intro Ciaccona is just as fast as her S3 shortened rotation. Ciaccona's outro is extremely simple and only amplifies Aero Erosion by the team by plus 100% for 30 seconds. This means if you're not playing an Aero Erosion team, aka a Frazzle team, you can skip her rotation the first time and just instantly go into her Liberation to provide Frazzle stacks. Later rotations, it is still recommended to run her actual rotation since she's extremely fast to rotate and she finally gets her intro. And teams that already rotate fast enough, aka sub 25 seconds team rotations, it is recommended to do her full rotation even the first time just for personal damage output. For inherent skill, her first one is basically just an anti-death gimmick during her ults when you're picking a dot type. It gives her 100% HP scaling shield for 4 seconds, which is more than enough time to select Aero Erosion or Frazzle and swap off. Her second inherent skill is a final multiplier on her Forte Heavy quadruple downbeat, increasing its overall damage by 30%. This brings it to almost match the damage of her Liberation, and as a main DPS where you spam her Forte Heavy, it makes heavy percent substats a lot more desirable and even better than Liberation percent. For minor nodes, Ciaccona brings 12% attack and 16% crit damage. This might make it a bit painful to build crit rate, but static miss exists and is a standard 5-star option. Echo set discussion time? TLDR, if you're playing her as a main DPS or Aero teammates, put her on Gust the Welkin set. This is basically a main DPS set mixed with Moonlit Clouds, getting all the DPS benefits being 40% Aero damage bonus for herself from the 2-piece and 5-piece effects while still granting a plus 15% Aero bonus to the team. Using Moonlit Clouds set instead when Gust of Welkin would be viable is a 20 to 35% personal damage loss. Yes, the 4 cost doesn't buff the team like Impermanence Heron, but it really isn't needed. Cartethyia will do so much damage due to Ciaccona's outro that we don't need Moonlit Clouds, and Jiyan's raw damage is low enough that Moonlit Clouds is not better than Gust the Welkin on Ciaccona for that kind of team. Remember, Ciaccona is our second strongest sub-DPS in the game. So when do you use Moonlit Clouds? When you're pairing her with any non-Aero team, like Zani DPS, Phoebe DPS, or some other weird non-Frazzle or non-Aero team, which I wouldn't recommend doing. For Gust Welkin, the Fleurdelys Echo is extremely important to Ciaccona's kit. She is extremely vulnerable to interruption during basic 3 after she intros, and doing so will reset her to basic 1. Fleurdelys time stops all enemies for 2 seconds during its cast animation, which is perfect for protecting Ciaccona's intro BA3-4 sequence. This guarantees Ciaccona's sub-DPS rotation is consistent, and a main DPS can be used to protect her DPS uptime when all team buffs are active. For Moonlit Clouds, because Ciaccona cannot act after casting Liberation, without cancelling Recital mode, you will have to fit in a Heron quick swap beforehand instead, or dash cancel it before casting her Forte Heavy plus Liberation. This can be somewhat awkward to perform, but all Ciaccona teams can easily fit a Heron cast in. On Gust Welkin, it does not matter if you're using double Aero 3 cost or Aero attack for main stats, as it's less than 1% overall damage loss on any 5-star weapon, and at most a 2% loss on a 4-star weapon. In fact, if you're using her signature, even double attack is viable, being less than 3% damage loss, but I wouldn't recommend doing this on any other weapon. For Moonlit Clouds, double Aero is about 7 to 10% ahead of double attack. But if you're putting her on Moonlit Cloud set, you probably aren't as concerned about her personal damage output, so this is okay. Remember, Moonlit Clouds is already a 20 to 35% personal damage loss regardless of main stat choice. The reason you bring Moonlit Ciaccona is usually because you want her Frazzle stacks for Phoebe or Zani DPS. For substats in general, crit is obviously best, then attack percent, and attack flat is always better than any damage percent roll on Ciaccona. But if you must, Liberation percent is the best option for sub-DPS, with heavy percent and basic percent trailing slightly behind. As a main DPS, basic percent is way better than Liberation percent or heavy percent. And finally for ER, I recommend 120. I've seen quite a few recommendations for 110, but this either requires sweaty quick swaps or only works casually on specific Ciaccona teams. Just get 120, it isn't hard, and is enough for every Ciaccona setup with no playstyle alterations needed. Because Ciaccona hits so damn hard already, and she's meant to be a sub-DPS, you actually don't need her signature weapon. There are only 3 reasons to pull it. Either you really like her, or you want to make Cartethyia hit harder than she will already, which she will, because she's the freaking Sentinel Resonator, or you're trying to use her on Jiyan teams. Now before we get into her weapon choices, just know that Ciaccona is not equal to Mortifi and Jiyan teams until S0R1. And is not better until S1R1, and isn't clearly better until S2R1. If you're going S0R0 Ciaccona for Jiyan, don't even bother, it's a downgrade over Mortifi. Please note that because I referenced 120 ER for Ciaccona instead of 110, all weapons besides Static Miss will need 2 ER Echo substats. This skews all weapons 3% down versus Static Mist. If you want a longer explanation on why this 3% happens, check the pinned comment. Okay, so Woodland Aria is a pretty good signature but also niche due to its lower overall benefits for the team buffs. It grants her a 24% arrow damage bonus, which is a bit low, but it also provides a 10% arrow shred on the enemy. This is worth about another 25 to 30% arrow damage bonus equivalent. Overall, it's roughly a 21 to 22% personal damage increase regardless of echo set you use on her. These effects only trigger with inflicting and hitting enemies with Aero Erosion, but because she's the only one in the game that can do this, it basically only works on her. Yes, I know Cartethyia will probably be able to inflict a little bit of Aero Erosion herself, like say Zani's 1 stack of Frazzle, but you're not gonna pull this sig for another gun user to use on Cartethia's team anyways. AKA, I can only recommend to pull this weapon if you're trying to force Ciaccona to work on Jiyan teams, or you want to play her as a main DPS. It really isn't needed for Cartethyia teams. If you're coping with Aero Rover or Alto main DPS, then yeah, they would really appreciate the extra buffs and shred to make up for their subpar personal damage. Besides her signature, your other options are Last Dance and Static Mist. There's barely a difference between these two weapons, because Last Dance buffs skill damage, of which Ciaccona barely does. Yes, Last Dance grants 12% attack unconditionally, but this is countered by Static Mist granting a free ER roll. Additionally, if you're using Ciaccona to buff an attack scaling unit like Jiyan, Phoebe, Zani, Aero Rover, or Alto, then Static Mist actually wins by providing them a free 10% attack. For 4-star options, R5, Romance, and Farewell easily reaches max stacks due to Ciaccona constantly applying Aero Erosion, parsing the best at 92% of Static Mist scaling regardless of set choice. R5 Pistols 26 offers an interesting choice, because not only is it about as strong as R5 Romance and Farewell at 92%, but it can also heal Ciaccona when she gets hit. The easiest way to trigger this is casting her Liberation right before the boss slaps you, because it grants you full hyper armor and shield during the recital mode while you're picking a dot type. This lets Ciaccona carry healer set if you'd rather give Moonlit set to someone else. Besides these two options, the next best choice is Relativistic Jet. It has basically identical parses at 92%, but can only be obtained from gacha, unlike the craftable Romance and Farewell, and does not offer alternative gearing options like Pistols 26, another craftable that allows her to hold healer set. Thunderbolt, Undying Flame, and Nova Burst all suck at Ciaccona because she barely deals skill damage and rotates fast enough that dodges are uncommon, much less dodging 3 times to fully stack a weak passive. For 3-star options, Pistols of Night is slightly better than Pistols of Voyager, but if you're looking this low, just craft an R1 Romance and Farewell or Pistols 26. Already 88% scaling of an R1 Static Mist and super easy to use. Now, one thing to consider is how much Aero Rover buffs Ciaccona's damage output, because Aero Erosion has non-linear scaling by stacks, and Aero Erosion already making up over 20% of Ciaccona's raw damage. Rover's outro effect, increasing Aero Erosion's stack cap to 6, has significant impact on Ciaccona's performance. Her constant erosion application easily lets her hit 6 stacks and results in a 34% extra personal damage output, which is stronger than her signature. Therefore, if you're willing to include Aero Rover in their clunky rotations on the team, it will already make up for not pulling her signature. If you stack her signature and Aero Rover's outro together, this increases Ciaccona's personal output by 58%. Now, her signature is slightly better when played as a main DPS, parsing 27% over Static Mist, and a 56% improvement at R5. Because her signature gains more value when played as a main DPS and how powerful she is already, I would recommend it for Ciaccona main DPS enjoyers. This will allow you to enjoy her full damage potential, while also providing extra benefits in teams where you play her as a sub-DPS. If you've managed to achieve all that we've discussed so far, then her endgame substats before any buffs should look a little bit like this. Do keep in mind these are scaled to level 90 with maxed out Forte, so it can take some time to reach this. Ciaccona's sequences generally either improve her rotation consistency, team buffs, or personal damage output. Her S3 shortens her own rotation, but there are already ways to get similar results with either jump cancels or double intro setups. Overall, Ciaccona remains a fast rotation unit regardless of investment and already has stellar personal damage output. She already works as a main DPS at S0 and more copies are not necessary, but signature weapon is advised. Otherwise, very few of her sequences matter and are actually on the weaker side. Her main stopping points are S2 and S6. Ciaccona's first sequence grants herself true hyper armor for the first 3 seconds after casting her skill. While you can precast it right before she intros, you can already use the Fleurdelys echo to time stop enemies during her basic attack sequence, so this hyper armor isn't needed. Casting basics also self-grants her plus 35% attack for 10 seconds, which is near permanent uptime when she's on field. Her off-field liberation damage doesn't matter as the pulses are the weakest move in the game. Overall, not a great S1. It is an 8.4% increase over S0. S2 is the first major stopping point. Casting Ciaccona's liberation will grant the team 40% arrow damage bonus for its duration. Because trying to use Ciaccona will end her liberation early, it is impossible for her to benefit from its own buff in a meaningful way. However, this buff is excellent for buffing your other Aero main DPS, being Cartethyia, Jiyan, Alto, Aero Rover, whoever you choose. While S2 is only a 4% personal damage increase over S1 and only 1.13 times as strong as S0, keep in mind the main value is in the team buff. S3 makes basic 4 grant 1 extra musical essence, your Forte resource. Now, introing plus BA34 will produce all 3 Forte instantly. However, instead of increasing the concerto generation of her skill, they chose to give her an extra skill charge. Therefore, the new S3 rotation is barely faster than jump cancels or double intro variants at S0, since you now have to cast her skill twice. It doesn't make Ciaccona any less vulnerable to interruption during basic 3-4, meaning you're still gonna rely on Fleurdelys echo. In other words, this sequence barely does anything. The shorter S3 rotation is technically a 21.5% DPS increase over S2. The true value, though, is not needing to jump cancel anymore if you weren't good at it. S3 is 1.37 times as strong as S0 by DPS, but only 1.05 times as strong by DPR. S4 is our first important main DPS sequence, meaning your Liberation Nuke and Forte Heavy ignore 45% of enemy defense. As a sub-DPS, this is still a 50% DPS increase over S3. It is a 1.58 times as strong as S0 by DPS, but only 1.21 times as strong by DPR. S5 grants Ciaccona a 40% liberation damage bonus, which is honestly kinda garbage, since she can only cast it once per rotation, and it only applies to her ults. This is a 4.6% DPS increase over S4 and 1.65 times as strong as S0 by DPS. It is only 1.27 times as strong as S0 by DPR. S6 makes her sylphs or herself deal 220% arrow damage in an AoE once, each time you or the sylph enter solo concert. Please note that this does not apply to recital mode, which is during her liberation. As a result, since subDPS Ciaccona enters recital mode very quickly, S6 barely benefits it at all. The true value lies in mainDPS Ciaccona, which spams solo concert sylphs everywhere, and basically spends any time in liberation at all. For a subDPS, S6 only a 6.8% DPS increase over S5, and 1.76 times as strong as S0. By DPR, it's a 1.35 times as strong as S0. Expect far better value out of S4 and S6 as a main DPS. It's time to go over Ciaccona's rotations. She has several options: the standard lazy rotation, the jump cancel rotation, the double intro rotation, the S3 rotation, and the main DPS rotation. Yes, that's at least 5. I never recommend doing the lazy rotation, as it's only being shown to demonstrate how much slower it is than the jump cancel rotation, or double intro rotation variants when playing her as a sub-DPS. Let's start with the lazy rotation. This is probably how they intended her to be played, as the full rotation timing is similar to other sub-DPS and results in unique ensemble sylph animations. Sylphs from basic 3-4 sing with her mic. Sylphs from Aerial plus basic 4 sing with the tambourine, and sylphs from skill plus basic 2-3-4 play her banjo. Guess what? Her lazy rotation goes into intro basic 3-4, then skill basic 2-3-4. In other words, you never see her banjo in jump cancel setups. The default duration of this rotation is 5.77 seconds. The main rotation we'll be using today is the jump cancel variant. This allows us to skip the animation in basic 4 to immediately set up a ground pound for another basic 4. Even the second basic 4 also gets animation cancelled by skill cast for extra concerto, so we can set up Forte heavy. To do this, we give Ciaccona her intro for 1 Forte stack. Cast Fleurdelys to protect your basic 3-4 for second Forte stack. Jump as soon as Ciaccona disappears after basic 3, and then aerial attack twice to slam back down. Once her back knee starts to unbend for basic 4, and cast skill while gaining our third Forte stack. Then pre-hold heavy during the skill animation so that directly cues Forte quadruple downbeat immediately afterwards. If you're using Moonlit Heron, you can instead cancel skill with Heron, then dodge cancel Heron while holding down a heavy attack to cast Forte, quadruple downbeat. As soon as the gunshot comes out, cast Liberation. The Forte's damage and suck radius will continue during your Liberation animation. If you want Aero Erosion, we can outro immediately, but remember to pick Spectro Frazzle if needed since it will not default to that automatically. The double intro rotation is even simpler. It completely removes the risk of messing up jump or dodge cancels, while also removing the longer rotation time needed to perform the cancel and aerial or dodge combo. You simply do Ciaccona's first intro and summon Fleurdelys to protect your basic 3-4 animation. Cast skill right as basic 4 begins. If you're using Heron instead, you can cast it after skill, but before you swap off. The second intro will grant her third Forte stack. Simply hold heavy attack during the intro animation and you'll immediately cast quadruple downbeat. Remember to liberation cancel as soon as the shot is fired. Then outro if you want Aero Erosion or pick Frazzle manually instead. The S3 rotation is pretty similar to the double intro rotation. Basically, instead of double intro, your basic 4 gives 2 Forte segments. You replace the second intro with a second skill cast to pad the missing concerto. It's a tiny bit faster than your basic 3-4 animation. This is even more important now because since your basic 4 squad is worth 2 more Forte segments, getting interrupted here completely defeats the entire point of sequence 3. Cast skill right as basic 4 begins, then cast it again. Pre-hold heavy during the second skill cast to cue quadruple downbeat, then liberation cancel as soon as the shot is fired. As usual, outro immediately if you want Aero Erosion or pick Frazzle manually instead. The final rotation variant is for mainDPS Ciaccona. Note that you can replace the jump cancels shown with ground dash to reset to basic 1. This is a 0.6 second time loss every time you do this, and because you cast 4 jump cancels per mainDPS rotation, it will easily cost you at least 2.5 seconds and I wouldn't recommend it. Ground dodge cancel is easier to play, but just a stepping stone to jump cancel mainDPS. This is the dodge cancel rotation, but we will instead be focusing on the jump cancel variant today due to its other advantages. The jump cancel rotation is not only faster, but better protected by the AoE hitbox of the Forte Heavy, which can auto-parry anything while it's active. Jump cancel can complete more moves and is more stationary, but the aerial slam itself has insane tracking. Shorter rotation also gives more leeway on back half rotation, parsing a frame perfect 10 seconds versus ground dodge cancel parsing a frame perfect 12.6 seconds. This gives us more leeway for mistakes when you're buffed by outros, like Sanhwa's 38% basic amplify lasting 14 seconds, or Alto's 23% aero amplify lasting 14 seconds. To perform mainDPS, we literally do the subDPS rotation first. That is intro into basic 3-4 with a jump cancel, then aerial 1-2 to slam back down for another basic 4. Cancel that with skill and pre-hold heavy to cast quadruple downbeat with the liberation cancel. Keep it on Aero Erosion, letting us instantly outro. The reason we want to proc our outro early is that Aero Erosion makes up a substantial part of our total damage output, still charting nearly 10% overall as a mainDPS. The outro doubles Aero Erosion output and costs effectively 0 time to cast Liberation for the nuke. This allows us to intro her in a second time for another fast Forte charge, preferably from Sanhwa or Alto to buff our overall DPS. This time we cast Fleurdelys to protect our intro basic 3-4 as we are fully buffed and want to ensure optimal usage of buff uptime. Jump cancel basic 4 into aerial 1-2 slam again, and this time dodge cancel the next basic 4, since skill won't be off cooldown yet. Hold down heavy during the dodge to instantly cast quadruple downbeat. You can jump cancel the Forte after the shot comes out to immediately go back into aerial 1-2, slamming into basic 4. Jump cancel it and loop back into another aerial 1-2 plus basic 4 until you have 3 Forte stacks. This time we can skill cancel basic 4 while pre-holding heavy for a quadruple downbeat again. Outro, unless you want to greed and do one more Forte rotation. Be aware that if you do one more, no matter how fast you go, Sanhwa's or Alto's outro buff will always fall off before the last Forte heavy. I only recommend going the extra rotation if it will kill the enemy. If you stop before the yellow section, you can easily rotate the team in under 25 seconds. The following S3 Plus rotation includes the extra purple hits from S6. These happen passively, so you can ignore them if you're S3 Plus, but not yet S6. The main difference at S3 Plus is your basic 4 giving 2 Forte segments instead of 1. This means that every full Forte bar needs 1 less basic 4 to fill, which means faster Forte heavies. So much faster that you can fit in an entire extra Forte heavy extra rotation. And it's slightly faster overall too, 13.6 instead of 14.07 seconds. However, remember that basic 4 is one of Ciaccona's strongest moves and we can skip its entire animation, so dropping it multiple times for an extra Forte heavy overall is only a moderate 8% personal DPS increase from S3's altered rotation itself. The main benefit of S3 Plus is being able to outro earlier if needed, after only 2 Forte heavies when Sanhwa buffs you. This gives more freedom on adapting rotations to the situation. Because the mini rotation into another Forte heavy is faster, you can even instead do 1 extra Forte heavy too, but once again it will be outside of Sanhwa's or Alto's 14 seconds outro amplify period. The rotation starts the same as the S3 subDPS. We intro in and preferably say Fleurdelys for the fully buffed bottom half later. Do basic 3-4 with skill cancel as soon as your third Forte fills. Cast skill again while pre-holding heavy to cast Forte quadruple downbeat. Then liberation cancel after the shot comes out. Pick Frazzle if you need it, else outro directly onto your sub-DPS, being either Sanhwa or Alto. Complete their rotation and re-intro into Ciaccona. Cast Fleurdelys now to protect your basic 3-4 sequence. Dodge cancel when third Forte fills and pre-hold heavy to cast quadruple downbeat the first time. Jump cancel after the shot fires into another aerial 1-2 plus basic 4. Jump cancel when basic 4 begins into another aerial 1-2 plus basic 4. Your Forte should now be full. Dodge cancel that basic 4 with a pre-hold heavy into your second quadruple downbeat. Jump cancel after the shot comes out and repeat 2 more aerial plus basic 4 combos to get your third Forte heavy out. Then outro to reset the team. Rinse and repeat. So how strong is mainDPS Ciaccona? With her Sig, she is as strong as Carlotta. 690k raw damage. This is 55k stronger than Brand mainDPS on paper. But because Brand mainDPS is 80% basic damage and Ciaccona is only 35% basic damage, then Sanhua buffs Brand better than Ciaccona, and thus Brand ends up actually slightly ahead in a full team. But Alto is a slightly better buffer than Sanhua for Ciaccona and allows her to match Brand. But most people don't have a fully built Alto versus Sanhua since their personal damage actually matters here. Especially with Ciaccona Sig because it also buffs Alto's damage. Also, because Sanhua and Alto are literally weaker buffers than Jocha and deal less damage than her, Carlotta's premium team in practice will still deal roughly 10 to 15% higher overall team DPS. Also consider that Ciaccona has much higher actions per second, is easier to be interrupted, and easier to mess up cancels than both Brand or Carlotta mainDPS. If you take signatures away though, Ciaccona mainDPS is definitely stronger than Brand mainDPS, as he is way more reliant on his Sig than Ciaccona. As a reminder, the in-depth version of Ciaccona's team building will be in a separate video, since it takes an enormous amount of time to get team data and rotations done. If you want an early peek, I've already refined all of her currently available teams in the spreadsheet. SubDPS Ciaccona actually prefers Verina over Shorekeeper, because not only does Verina rotate 1 to 2 seconds faster than Shorekeeper, but the double intro Ciaccona rotation is always at least 1 second faster than any other variant except S3, meaning Verina Ciaccona teams are always 2 to 3 seconds faster than Shorekeeper variants as a bare minimum. This means 2 to 3 seconds more leeway for mistakes, extra attacks for filling energy, and possibly faster team rotations. Ciaccona has insanely fast rotations already and only a 20 seconds ult cooldown. Coupled with Verina, it is very easy to see the possibility of 20 to 22 second team rotations and certain comps becoming viable to make up for the loss of Shorekeeper if the mainDPS cooldowns aren't an issue. Therefore, Shorekeeper is definitely not needed for sub-DPS Ciaccona teams, and it does not noticeably improve team DPS either. For mainDPS Ciaccona, she prefers Shorekeeper since she will double intro herself regardless of healer, and run a roughly 25 second team rotation, nullifying Verina's advantages. The most obvious Ciaccona teams are focused on Aero DPS to synergize with her outro amplifying Aero Erosion, Sylphs buffing team Aero damage, and Signature providing Aero Red Shred on the enemy. The premier team is of course going to be Cartethyia Ciaccona, but she's not releasing until next patch, thus the flex slot would be Aero Rover vs Shorekeeper or Verina. Expect Aero Rover team to hit slightly harder due to benefiting from Ciaccona's signature Aero Shred, and Rover increasing Aero Erosion stack cap with its non-linear scaling. Expect that team to parse at a bare minimum equal damage output to the premium Zani Phoebe team since Cartethyia is the Sentinel's Resonator after all. Due to the quick swap friendly nature of Ciaccona's buffs and outro, there is also the possibility of a dual Aero DPS setup, Cartethyia, Jiyan, Ciaccona. In the meantime, we still have many other already available viable options. Our next best team candidates are Phoebe or Zani mainDPS. This is because Ciaccona of course can provide Frazzle on Liberation, but this makes her Aero damage bonus and Aero Erosion Amplify completely useless. As a result, Ciaccona should be seen as a Spectro Rover side grade who is much easier to play and demands less field time, rather than an alternative to Phoebe Confession mode. In classic Zani teams with Shorekeeper or Verina, replacing Phoebe results in a massive damage loss, dealing similar damage output to the Zani Spectral Rover setups. However, it is far easier to fit the team within a 25 seconds rotation for Zani's ult cooldown, since Ciaccona is much faster than Rover. In fact, because her buffs are useless, you can even forgo Ciaccona's first rotation in the opener, and use her Liberation alone to make up for the team being -1 intro during first rotation. No ER adjustments need to be made to anyone in particular, as Ciaccona is an above average energy producer. In Phoebe mainDPS teams, Ciaccona gives a lot more reliable Frazzle application than Spectral Rover. Unlike Zani, Phoebe only cares that the enemy has Frazzle on them and not how much Frazzle you apply. This means Ciaccona's constantly pulsing nature of her Liberation makes her much easier to use than Spectral Rover, while also having a faster rotation. You no longer need to swap off between waves of enemies to reapply Frazzle. This team is actually about 5 to 10% stronger than the Spectro Rover Phoebe variant, because Ciaccona in a full subDPS rotation still deals far more damage than Spectro Rover, despite not bringing 10% Spectral Shed, while also being much less susceptible to damage loss from interruptions or Frazzle reapplication. For the triple Spectro team, Ciaccona Zani plus Phoebe, or Rover, is weaker than Zani Phoebe Rover. This is super simple. Either you're lacking Phoebe's massive 100% Frazzle Amplify outro, or you're lacking Rover's 10% Spectro Shred, which will buff both Phoebe's Confession Mode and Zani's raw output. Losing Rover also means you have one less Liberation to apply a burst of Frazzle stacks, which would be used to quickly restore Blaze mid-Liberation for Zani's third Heavy Slash Nightfall chain to be fully buffed. Ciaccona's slow Frazzle application rate is insufficient to fully buff 3 Nightfalls, as you cannot overcap 100 Blaze before Zani casts her Liberation, and are thus reliant on applying huge amounts of Frazzle instantly, like Phoebe or Rover's ults. For GNDPS, Ciaccona needs at least S0R1 to match Mortifi, and is not better until S1R1, preferably S2R1. This is because Mortifi's 38% heavy amplify outro is too powerful when combined with its S6 plus 20% team attack buff. Not to mention Mortifi's actually stellar personal damage as well. Otherwise, Ciaccona represents an easier to play option over Mortifi, allowing even faster team rotations if you don't want a quick swap. If you go super sweaty quick swap, Ciaccona is no faster than Mortifi teams. Also, if you never built up your Mortifi properly, then Ciaccona remains a very viable option since, most people actually build their 5 stars they pull for. The third slot on this team should still be Shorekeeper Verina, as Aero Rover barely buffs Jiyan, unlike Aero Rover helping Cartethyia with Aero Erosion cap increase. Maybe if Aero Rover gets R5 Blood Pack Pledge in the future, they'll be viable on Jiyan teams in the healer slot. For Ciaccona main DPS, Sanhua and Alto are the only viable sub-DPS that give good enough buffs while still rotating quickly with good personal damage. Alto is slightly better as an option, dealing more personal damage than Sanhua and also benefiting from Ciaccona's signature Arrow Shred. The gap is very small, so I wouldn't go out of my way to build Alto for this unless you really like main DPS Ciaccona, as I imagine most people actually have a built Sanhua these days, whereas Alto is probably still collecting dust. Keep in mind she is a very high actions per second, easier to mess up, and more vulnerable to interruption than any other main DPS option shown today. The last option is a Copium Aero Rover main DPS setup. I wouldn't recommend doing this at the moment, but Aero Rover's outro makes Ciaccona's sub-DPS damage skyrocket, while she also provides small Aero damage Rover buffs. This makes the team strong enough to be viable, but does not fix Aero Rover's extremely clunky kit design and aerial attacks and ground play, as well as just relatively low multipliers. You might see a bit more use of this team once Aero Rover eventually gets their S6 in like half a year or more from now. Thank you so much for watching through this entire video. I hope this Ciaccona guide has been useful for deciding on whether to pull on her banner. As a reminder, all spreadsheets documenting my testing can be found in the description and pinned comment. Do feel free to make a copy if you want to change values and test stuff. Cheers! If this is your first time watching, feel free to leave a like or better yet subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Stick around if you want to see interesting videos. You don't want to miss out on any of that, do you? That'll be it for this one. Thank you all for watching and I'll see you all next time.